On this episode of the podcast, I have Joshua Scott with me. He is an accomplished information security leader. We're going to cover a few different topics. I think our main area is going to be about the shifting of the left of security's role in the SDLC. But we're also going to touch on the impact on teams, how you actually have to manage and maintain that transition. I'm really excited to have Josh on. Thanks for being on and doing the podcast.
Thanks, Amir. Glad to be on.
Absolutely. So I definitely did not do justice to your background, but maybe just some context for listeners. Just tell us kind of who you are, and then we'll dive into things.
Okay, sure. Not a problem. So I've been in the tech field since like 94. Started doing help desk and network support back in 94, 95. Really got into security kind of in 98, 99, and then kind of just really enjoyed it. And one of the reasons I stuck with it is it allowed me to touch everything and get involved in a lot more things because I couldn't figure out where I wanted to go career-wise. So from 99 till about 2012, I was a independent contributor, basically doing firewall administration and SIM implementations and very technical. And I was primarily the security engineer, security architect for various organizations. Spent 6 years at a large engineering company, Jacobs Engineering. After that, joined a company called Move, which the flagship product is Realtor.com. There, I actually spent the first 5 years as an IC and just, kind of being the architect and the engineer, building all the systems and managing PCI and vulnerability scanning and all that. And then I was the founding member of the team. I actually formed the security team, moved into leadership. I'd always avoided leadership before just because I really liked the tech side of it, but I figured this was a new opportunity, a new challenge, and really enjoyed the leadership side of it. So, in 8 years, I built out from being the founding member to having a team of 10 people, and we were doing a lot of, advanced things and really shifting to the left, the subject of the talk we're having. We built a pretty impressive program that I was very proud of and hired some really, really talented people, and we did some pretty cool things.
Awesome. And I guess, the main area we're going to talk about is shifting to the left and the impact on teams. So maybe just as a starting point, a team of 10 you built up. Who made up that team? Who was on that team?
So initially, as we were growing the team, we were very focused on not necessarily the things that were shifting left, but more of the operational type duties. So we had the traditional, GRC type roles, and we had the security operations types of roles. And then we had some engineering type roles, but we really didn't have the product security side of it. That was something that actually we added probably about 6 years into the mix. And what we found was, the minute we started doing that and really started, shifting left and looking at things from a different perspective of how we can actually innovate and how we can actually start, writing our own tool sets and just looking at the problem like another engineering team, we found that we were able to move a lot faster. We were able to actually, hit business objectives and deliver better value to the organization.
So obviously, as you're building the team, initially you're more operator focused. You become more product engineering in the last 5-6 years. I know you mentioned building the tools that fit your team better. What were some of the things that went into that decision-making process? So if somebody's, maybe listening to the podcast and they've always, brought in vendors to do what they need to do, what goes into deciding, that you'd make that shift?
So what we were finding is we were spending quite a bit of time evaluating vendors and bringing on third-party solutions, but we weren't really accomplishing anything. We weren't really providing the value that was needed to the business. And then, we'd been, following the likes of Netflix and various other companies who were actually building out their own tool sets. And we said, we understand why they're doing that because they're actually able to deliver value and it's very context specific to their business. So, we basically took it upon ourselves to say, we really need to change the way we're doing it. We can't just bring on new vendors all the time. We can't keep on looking at third parties to solve the problem when all they do is they don't provide enough business context. They don't really understand the environment. And then, so we have to have somebody to manage that tool. And then we still have to do some kind of customization to make it work for our environment. So then we said, you know what, let's take a step back. Let's really look at what we're trying to solve. And let's figure out, ways we can actually deliver point solutions that actually are valuable to our organization. So what we found was that, we saw how, the support the engineering teams were getting within the organization. We saw how they were actually able to solve problems. So we wanted to kind of model our behavior after those types of teams. And again, like I said, what we saw from companies like Netflix and Etsy and Capital One and all that, where they actually had that type of initiatives ongoing.
Interesting. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially for the type of company that Realtor is. Let me ask you this. So when this discussion first comes up, you guys obviously have a budget. You're bringing vendors in. How does that change when you're sitting down and looking at annual budgets and going, well, I'm going to shift from buying tools and bringing in third-party solutions to I'm going to start becoming more product focused. What did that look like as you were kind of going through that process?
Essentially, it was more of a shift towards people. So instead of spending money on third-party tools and from an OpEx standpoint, spending money on some kind of SaaS provided cloud security solution, we would actually opt to bring in more people, whether it's through a consulting engagement, for a period of time to kind of bootstrap a project, or full-time people. So we did a pretty good job with that. I mean, I initially, when some of my latest hires that I made in like 2015 were very much in that mindset. So they were a big part of actually really helping us with that transition. So I had some of the key building blocks already in place. So it was just a matter of, shifting the way we look at things, kind of really starting to think about ourselves as an engineering team, starting to think about ourselves from, a value standpoint. How do we actually deliver value to the organization? And then choosing a couple pet projects, something small to really start with. And that's really, as we started getting into the product security areas, that's what we figured we'd start with is, this is a perfect opportunity. This is something that we didn't have an existing program in place for. So we, figured this is the perfect place to do some automation, to start delivering some different services or products, products per se, to the organization to actually show that value.
How did, I guess, at that point for the first several years, let's say in the organization, your job was to bring in vendors, implement product, and all of a sudden now you're becoming more product engineering focused. I guess, how did the relationship change with other departments? How were other people viewing this? I mean, because obviously, security, in the traditional sense, you really don't necessarily want to be heard from in some ways. It's probably the best thing. But as you're now coming up with more proactive tools you're building, I mean, you're probably dealing with other pieces of, departments and whatnot. So how did that change for you guys?
It changed actually quite a bit because teams were now looking at us from a different light. They saw that we were actually targeting some of the challenges that they were facing, and we were actually solving them. I think that definitely helped. So, again, one of the first things we were working on is how do we actually increase the velocity of engineers with how they're dealing with vulnerabilities that flow through, kind of the build cycle. So we did a lot of automation to basically take them out of their loop, take the vulnerabilities and do some false positive reduction, do some consolidation, do some aggregation, and actually put them into Jira. We wanted to focus on using the same tool sets and using the same ecosystem that the engineers were already used to using. So what we found is that they actually really liked it. We were driving down risk, we were driving down vulnerabilities, we were providing them very specific information that was needed to solve the problem, and we get to innovate. We get to actually brag about some of the things we were doing. So we got a lot of kudos from those various teams too. We actually even got participation from them. So we had a security champions network with about 30 different folks from across the various teams, and they would actually help influence kind of the direction of some of the products we were creating, and ideas for future products and ways to enhance what we were building.
Is it safe to say that the security champion, I guess, thought that wouldn't have come into play when you guys were more focused on being more operators and not building, correct?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, we had tried kind of a security ambassador, security evangelist type function outside of the product security areas, and we really didn't have kind of the same participation. So, when we started doing product security and really started thinking about it from a shifting left and kind of creating our own tool sets, they were much more keen to participate and to provide feedback, and it definitely helped quite a bit.
Let's actually stay with that for a second. I'm curious because I was talking to another CISO, and he said security has this mystique of being super complex. And I said, well, it is complex. And he said, well, it is and it isn't. And I was like, okay. And I guess when you started the program before and it didn't take off, and obviously now that you're more product engineering focused, maybe there's a roadmap so people can contribute. What becomes that difference? Like all of a sudden people are contributing, they're more involved. Is it just the tool sets are more common and it becomes maybe the fear factor goes down? I mean, what do you hypothesize would have caused that?
I mean, I think it's a bit of multiple things. I actually agree that security doesn't have to be hard. I think we overcomplicate things. I'm an engineer at heart, so I think, we have the nature of overcomplicating things at times. I mean, when you really get back down to it, it doesn't have to be complicated. And, it's about finding a particular problem, deciding what that outcome is that you want to actually go after, and then really doing it well. And I believe, less is more. So we were trying to take on way too much before. And I think that's what makes kind of the mystique of security. So many things going on, so much complexity throughout the environment. We wanted to reduce that. We wanted to say, you know what, we're going to solve, a few select problems and still drive down risk and still drive down vulnerabilities within the organization, but we're going to do it well. We're going to take on these small problems and really solve them well and actually get feedback from our customers so they can actually see that as well. Because if security is doing everything in a vacuum and nobody can see that you're providing that kind of value, then, they still don't know what you do and you're still continually justifying your existence. And, it got to the point where we didn't want to do that anymore. We want everybody else to become our advocates as well. And that's where champions come into play. That's where them, participating and even contributing to the code bases that we were creating. That was all huge. And that required us really looking at it differently.
Did you actually at some point need a product manager, or was there some type of backlog roadmap that you guys were maintaining as people are seeing other potential opportunities for you guys to tackle?
Yeah, we definitely talked about it. So unofficially, I was the product manager, and then I was kind of pushing it on. We kind of took on between two of my key leaders. We took on that responsibility. So we maintained a backlog. We had a loose roadmap. So we were still kind of improving it because we'd been doing this for about 2 years and really kind of it was a complete transformation of what we were doing before. So going from an operator role to kind of thinking like an engineering team and leveraging the same tool sets that engineers are using in the same ecosystem. So we started doing agile and scrum. We started leveraging GitHub. Everything was actually checked into code. We started doing everything data driven with lots of instrumentation to actually help influence kind of the decisions we make. So it definitely took a while to get there. So we started doing the kind of the product manager type discussions and putting together the roadmaps, but we still weren't super mature at that level.
So obviously you guys are building some smaller tools. So I'm assuming you still have product that was still in the organization, correct?
Yeah, yeah. And we still have third party. So we weren't replacing everything. We still had a lot of third party tools. So for example, from an SDLC and from the build cycle standpoint, we still had tools like checkmarks for SAS scanning. We still had, Black Duck for software composition analysis, third party vulnerability scanning. And the whole idea was we wanted to be able to still have those types of tools and then bring in any other ones we want, but we wanted to abstract that away from everyone else that interacts with these tools. We didn't want engineering teams or someone else to think of, check marks when they think of the security team. We wanted them to think about our product name, which we called our VRP, Vulnerability Remediation Pipeline. It was a very non-fancy way of kind of talking about the process and all the tools that fit into this ecosystem for vulnerability remediation. We wanted to refer to it as that because then we could actually replace the tool and it doesn't really impact anybody on the front end because they don't even know what we're using.
That makes sense. Interesting. I guess one challenge I was thinking, and maybe you can then kind of talk about this, is obviously your team is becoming more engineering oriented. You still have product, internal, third party product, and things are going to go wrong. Did you have scenarios where the team had to stop? Like, was the security, the more the product engineering side, insulated enough that if something came up that they were not pulled in, or was there a balancing act at having to still be involved with day-to-day security initiatives and stuff that you guys are doing from an operational standpoint?
It was a bit more of a balancing act. So I had a fairly flat structure. I mean, one of the goals I had within my team was I wanted everybody to be able to contribute to any area that they wanted to. I mean, that was really about, helping them grow and helping them kind of find what they were most interested in. That's what I found too is, when you put people into the right spots and give them the flexibility to kind of, venture off into different areas. So if they wanted to do automation, but they were traditionally a GRC person, then they could. So that's kind of why I had the flat structure. But back to the question though, there were definitely times where we had to put some of the engineering work we were doing on hold because of maybe a minor incident or because of some other type of investigation operational issue.
Absolutely. I guess maybe we could take a step back. I mean, we're talking a lot about more of the, what you started implementing with product engineering. I guess if you went back a step and started looking at, talking about you had a team that was more operators of products. They were very savvy with bringing in those products, implementing them. You had consulting companies or whatnot, helping with, stand those things up. But as you started introducing product engineering, how did your team view that? Because obviously, if I'm not an engineer and all of a sudden I see somebody heading, down the path of engineering, I might go, well, what am I going to do? What was the mindset of the team? How did you talk to them about this?
So about half of them were actually fully on board. So this was kind of a team discussion, and we talked about how do we actually start it. And it was a slow transition. It wasn't just one day we say we're now doing it this way. We started with something very small, and it was one person who really took it, and then he kind of ran with it, made it bigger, and then it just kind of started expanding, and it was a snowball effect. We saw the value from it, and we kept on focusing more attention on it. But there were definitely other folks who didn't have kind of the coding background. I mean, half my team had some kind of coding chops, and they could actually crank out some scripts or, tie things in and had some interest in it. The other half really didn't, but there were a couple that definitely wanted to have that experience. So again, by having the flat structure, I gave them the opportunity to kind of, learn some of that, learn some Python, dive in and write a module for, some AWS automation, something along those lines. And then there were some that just really wasn't for them. So we found ways to kind of still get them involved in the process and maybe do some light work around this ways, like perhaps, if it's a policy and they're now checking it into GitHub to maintain the policies there. So at least it kind of sets the groundwork for doing some automation at some point, but it's still simple enough for them to kind of, let's maintain our policies in GitHub or maintain, kind of some threat structures and threat use cases in GitHub. So they were more than capable of doing that. They also did other things too, like they would help document things, they would help understand, they would operate the system. Because even then, after we build everything, it still needs to be operated just like anything else.
Absolutely. So I guess the flip side to this always, and I know we talked about this off air, but the talent side. So I know things were flat. It sounds like obviously you had a pretty capable team to start, developing in their background, able to pick things up. Did you feel like at some point as you're making this transition, are you looking at this going, well, it's becoming more engineering focused? And I know it's a slow process, but are you looking at skill sets and going, well, I might be missing X, Y, and Z on the team. I need to go find this person who is going to have a hybrid interest in, well, they're going to be a software engineer in background, but an interest in security. Like, how did that go as you're starting to round out the team with more specialized skills, maybe?
So I got really lucky. I mean, the first senior engineer I hired had a lot of passion around kind of the automation and the engineering mindset. He had never been an engineer, like a software engineer, but he was definitely a very good coder and liked to script things. So he was kind of the one that we did kind of the proof of concept with, and he built a lot of things, really did some of the automation, started expanding it from there. And then, so my team was about 5 people at that time. So what we found is, all right, seeing the value from that, then, I had exactly what you said, the mindset of, all right, I got to start hiring people that really think this way. I mean, I wasn't hiring, software engineers. I definitely wanted, security professionals who have a kind of a knack for, the software engineering side, or a security professional that was a software engineer at some point in the past. That's what we did to kind of expand the kind of the next 3 or 4 people that came out of the team. So they all had that capability and they were all doing quite a bit of that. But definitely it was on the roadmap to actually, it's still on the roadmap to hire probably 2 or 3 more dedicated like software engineers who are just literally cranking out code all day. And that really went back to needing that kind of product manager type role to really understand this is what they're building and this is what the outcome is. And that's kind of what we hadn't gotten to yet. So that's why we didn't hire like dedicated software engineers yet.
I think you have a pretty good blueprint for somebody who wants to go down this path. It sounds like you dealt with all the different components. I guess a question that I was just thinking through, like if I'm in charge of security and I am, listening to this, or I've heard of, shifting security to the left, and I'm like, okay, he said a small project. What are some of those small areas of opportunities that you guys undertook that were successful?
I mean, when we did our cloud transformation, one of the ones that we started with is we were looking at various tools. We have a very large AWS environment. And we were looking at tools like, Evident.io and Redlock and various other types of cloud security tools. We really didn't need all of those things. One of the problems we continually had was just exposure of data. So we said, all right, how do we actually solve this one problem? And let's figure out how do we actually solve you know, basically when somebody shares something externally, removing that or restricting it, making it private again if it's made public. And then once we did that, we said, okay, that's a good little, kind of proof of concept. Another one was we're generating lots of vulnerability tickets essentially for all of the engineering teams. So we wanted a way to kind of really automate that process and make it simple for them. I mean, that was another small little project. So we found just, what are the pain points within these various teams and something that we're dealing with on a regular basis that we really want to automate and kind of start turning into and productize it for, lack of a better term, but, finding those little nuggets. Another one too is we actually used to do monthly hack days, which actually ended up being, a lot of places where we got some good ideas. And it was hack days just for the security team. So, once a month on Thursday, what we would do is it was the entire day to work on anything that was related to, a new product offering, an improvement to an existing product offering, something where, even the folks who don't code, they have an opportunity to kind of really influence that and play around with, some of the new tech. And in one of our sessions, we actually just came up with a real simple way to, take data out of Jira, create a weekly vulnerability report essentially from all the data in Jira and start sending that to the VPs to kind of just show them kind of the state of security from, a ticketing standpoint. And that was just a hack day thing, but it was one of those ones that actually helped with, the exposure and for, we now had a conduit out to engineering leadership to kind of talk about the state of security within their product sets. So it's just finding those little opportunities to really show where we can innovate, where we can actually do something unique.
It sounds like, that's especially shifting, mindset and the balance of the team. Obviously, a small little pivot, the team also seeing, some of the wins, they're seeing other departments, interested in the work, the collaboration versus before, maybe feeling a little bit more siloed and feeling like, it's more just, hey, it's us, the security team, and it's the rest of the organization. I guess when you start looking back at that and the evaluations of, well, should we try building this or should we just leave it, and go ahead and find the tool? Was there any thought in terms of, if it got too big an initiative to build, that's, was the line in the sand that you'd say, well, maybe we won't touch that one?
We really didn't run across too many of those scenarios because what we did is we would break down the problem into, much smaller segments. So we could say, this is what we really need to solve. This is the outcome we're looking for. So when we think about, like a cloud security, vendor, they do so much and there's so many different pieces. But if all we're looking to do is solve one thing, like removing public access from an S3 bucket, that's easy enough to solve through, the engineering efforts that we're talking about. And then we can start, as we start expanding that, we can really start thinking about, does it make sense to bring something else on? And then what happened is, as we were building out even that cloud security solution, it ended up was very purpose built for our organization. We kept on adding to it. It was very flexible. We actually couldn't get the same level of, business context or flexibility with any of the commercial offerings that were out there. So what we found was it's just if we break it down, into small enough segments, we solve the one problem that we're after, and then kind of expand from there, and and kind of move it up. There's really not much we can't solve through this type of methodology. Now, of course, there's going to be certain types of things. We're not going to go out and write our own antivirus, right? So, that wouldn't make any sense. We're not going to write our own, SaaS scanning tool. That wouldn't make any sense. We're automating kind of the glue or the orchestration layers in between these different types of tool sets.
And that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, there's purpose built products that, would take an army of people to
Right.
replicate.
Yeah.
Were you seeing other departments as you guys were, becoming more product focused, right? Were you seeing other departments asking questions from their engineering standpoint? Because obviously now you guys are looking at the problem differently. Maybe, the actual core product development, they had a question. I mean, was there any overlap in terms of other actual software engineering teams?
There were definitely questions posed to us or, recommendations. And that's something too that we were starting to do was, how do we actually get feedback from our customers regularly? They were our customers. So we would, talk with them. We would talk about, the new features or new components that we're adding in our champions meetings, and they would kind of give some feedback and, tell us whether we're on the right track or not. We started kind of, beta testing, certain functions and see if it actually would work for them. They were providing, lots of feedback, and sometimes they would provide back some code segments or some ways to help it. But there was definitely no real overlap between what they were already working on. They were just, helping us out within what we were building.
I guess if you're looking back at the whole process, are there any things that you would have done differently? I guess now that you've kind of gone through it, would you keep it all the same? Was there anything that you go, well, knowing this, I would alter these decisions?
Definitely. I mean, so we started this effort back in like 2015. In the first couple of years, we definitely went about it a little bit differently. So, we were doing some automation, some items, but we weren't focusing on the problems that engineers or the teams were having. So we didn't have enough interaction with them. And I think that's general of security across a lot of areas from what I've seen is, we really need to understand what is it that we're trying to solve and what is the business risk that we really want to address and then go after that business risk. I think, if I were to look back to, myself as a leader when I first started doing it, there definitely would be some good lessons like, make sure you're focusing on what the business problem is, make sure you, are communicating with your customers and make sure you're celebrating your successes too. That was something we didn't do enough of because we did a lot of work and we did a lot of cool things, but we didn't celebrate them enough or even communicate it out enough and talk about what we did and break it down and, do like a lunch and learn or a brown bag type session to talk about the tools we created. It wasn't until probably like 3 years into it that we started doing that. And all of a sudden everybody said, wow, this is really cool. Can you do some other things? What about this? And that's when we started getting that kind of the feedback loop going a little bit more. And that was huge. So I would start the feedback loop earlier on. I would communicate more. I would give a little bit more latitude to kind of, my first engineer that was kind of doing the proof of concept and just kind of let him run with it. I think we were trying to do too much at one time. And it's just, here's one problem, go figure out how to solve it.
I mean, I think, taking on what you did, I think those are awesome, lessons learned. I guess the question I was going to ask you off of that is, where do you think, like, if you were to project forward with the success you saw, where could this go? Like, how much product engineering could a security team tackle until? And again, you're not going to go build the scanners and the antivirus components, but how far could they go down? I mean, how much can they start building?
I think there's not much they can't do. I mean, I think everything that's done throughout all aspects of security should really be thought about in this manner. For example, like GRC, there's no reason that policies can't be automated and, automate the delivery of them and automate the, even the editing, all of these things. Every aspect of security can have some portion of this automation and this productizing of it. Detection and response, there's no reason that, the threat cases and the monitoring components and all those kind of things can't be built into some type of automation. It makes it a lot easier from a maintenance standpoint because now you're checking things into code, they get automatically deployed. You don't need that operator to sit there and make sure that, the tool's maintained. You let the automation, the infrastructure and all the ecosystems you have for doing this take care of that. From an infrastructure standpoint, there's plenty of opportunities there that, even from a firewall management standpoint, when I think back to, previous positions I've had and when I was doing firewall administration, it would have been great to, have firewall rules checked into code somewhere where they just get automatically deployed and you have some kind of, review system. So I think it's big. I think it also helps from an employee standpoint, from an engagement standpoint, from a value justification standpoint, because you're building something that's very focused on what the company needs. And that also, you get a lot of accolades for that. And it actually makes the employees feel good too. And then if you have the staff that really enjoy it, they're building things that are actually providing value and they're getting accolades for it. It's like a win-win right there.
I think that's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of evolution that can happen here. And again, looking at what you did, moving from more of a team of operators to maybe a hybrid product engineer team balancing with third party tools, it sounds like there's definitely a blend that you can go towards. But obviously, as you get more involved and you're getting more successes and you're just building on it, I think it sounds like the confidence will kind of let you look at other problems to tackle once you get some of those wins under your belt.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome, man. Awesome. This has been brilliant. I think it's been a great discussion. If someone has a question, maybe they want to, do something similar or they're kind of stuck in the process or whatever it is there any preferred mediums that you'd like somebody to contact you via?
They can email me, joshua@joshuascott.net.
Okay.
I'm happy to talk about these things. I love these types of discussions and, talking about what we did and, even getting into the nitty gritty of it. It's been fun. It's been great to see kind of what the impact has been and then just the impact of the employees as well. I mean, we helped out the org and the employees were really passionate about it. They were really excited to work on these things and that was great.
To be honest with you, I think that's the key takeaway that I have is that you're bringing visibility to some of the work that otherwise goes undetected because somebody assumes there's a third party tool that's doing the lifting. And all of a sudden people are seeing, product ship and they're like, well, they're delivering something, which maybe it's a perception thing, but you know what they say about perception.
Right. Yep. Security is an interesting, area because it has been historically a black box. People don't really know what security teams do. And having to continually justify and explain what it is that you do is tough, right? So if you position yourself as a product organization and you position yourself as an enabler of the business, you're not here to stop the business. You're here to help business. You're not the team of no or the police or the, big brother. You're actually here to help the organization, reduce risk. And when you approach it from that standpoint and you start showing products that actually help the organization with that, the rest of the organization becomes partners and they're more than willing to help out and things start moving faster and it's a snowball effect.
It sounds like it is the case from the standpoint of that, the value justification. Again, I keep going back to, you mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, sitting in extensive amount of meetings, evaluating tools. When you're having your discussions with VPs and other departments, and they kind of can see that's the way you're operating, they're probably thinking they have a different image, especially if you don't know. Like you said, it's a black box, the view of what you're doing behind the scenes, and all of a sudden now, they're involved and they're in the process, and you're establishing a backlog, and somebody might have an idea or might see an opportunity that otherwise they would have never brought to your attention. So it just sounds like it's a much more inclusive, bringing people closer to the security process than otherwise.
It really is. I mean, something else I believe strongly in is transparency from a security standpoint. So by doing this and being very open with the organization about what you're doing, and we're not just spending money on people and technology in a black box, and we have no idea what value they're getting. Let's be very transparent with them. Let's be a product organization that's delivering some kind of value, and be open about what we're delivering, and be open about what we're going to deliver, and what it's actually doing. What risks it's driving down. What's the impact of the work, and that's been huge. That's actually because of that, we're able to do a complete 180 and go from something that, we were viewed as just a cost center that was just an organization that, we just cost money and we would spend money. But we weren't something that was actually helping move things forward. I mean, we've helped with, increasing velocity. And that's huge because it's one of the things we were actually, big on from a company standpoint is how do we actually make our engineers move faster? Well, from a security standpoint, we actually helped with that.
That's awesome. Yeah, actually, just the view as a cost center, I think that would be a massive shift of, just the perception, again, the perception of what somebody might think of security. And also, if everyone, again, going back to, we mentioned security is viewed as being very complicated and complex. And all of a sudden now other engineers are saying, hey, they're using the same tool set. We're literally using very similar components and infrastructure pieces. And maybe that takes a little bit of that edge off of how they view it. And I don't know, maybe that just changes the perception of the program possibly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, man. I think this is fantastic. Can't wait to get some feedback on this. We'll definitely publish the email, your LinkedIn in the show notes. So if anyone, has any questions to follow up with you directly, I'm sure you have more to kind of expound on here. I really appreciate you being on the show and doing the podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being on the show, and this has been great. Happy to talk with anyone.
Absolutely. Awesome. Awesome. Well, guys, that's it for this week. Appreciate listening. We'll be back again next week, different guest. And please send through the suggestions, maybe topics, anything that you want us to maybe cover. Always looking for new ideas. And then also, leave a review for the podcast. Give us a rating. It really does help expand the listenership, gets the word out there. I'd love to see that happen. And we'll be back again. Thanks.